Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy podcast. This is episode 81. Can auditions be inclusive? With Kirsten Oberoi. One of the foundational principles of this show is that we as humans and as colleagues don't have to agree about everything, and that's okay. In fact, I even take it a step further because I'm so passionate about this concept. We need disagreement and dialogue in order to learn and grow. This episode is based on that principle. I recently came across Kirsten during a Facebook disagreement, and I thought it would make a great podcast conversation. The disagreement centered around our philosophies related to choir auditions and what it means for a program to be people-centered. I think of my program as people-centered. She thinks of her program as people-centered, yet we run completely different programs with completely different philosophies. One of the things that I think is great about choral music is that there is room in the choral community under the big tent for all kinds of philosophies. Kirsten made a splash recently with her new podcast, Choral Connectivity, and her blog called No Auditions Ever. She is making valuable contribution to the conversation, but I only agreed with about 82.7% of it. So I thought we would chat to hash out some of the disagreements and also find out where our common ground lies. And there's quite a bit of that. You know, those of you who listen regularly to this show, that I take on the topic quite a bit of what it means for the choral world to be elitist. And this is a really good tangential topic for this episode, this conversation that you're about to hear. For me, I will only speak for myself. Elitism and being elite are not the same thing. In other words, a choir, a program, a sports team, a business, a school can strive to perform at an elite level without being elitist. That is something that I believe very strongly. You can be people-centered and also strive for excellence, however you choose to define it. I've got lots of podcasts on this topic, so I won't go into it here, but this is a really good real-world exploration of these philosophies. So in this episode, I have a chance to defend the idea that auditioning your choir, even asking kids to sing alone, what we could think of as rigorous demands on kids in a choir, is people-centered, and it is growth-centered, and it is, in fact, not elitist. Now, of course, you're going to listen to this conversation where, as I mentioned, there will be some back and forth, and I think that is refreshing. I've actually been wanting to get somebody to come on the podcast who doesn't quite agree with some of the way I formulate things or frame things, and that's been a tough sell. So I very much respect Kirsten for coming into the lion's den, so to speak, knowing ahead of time that we did not agree on this. And she came anyway, which, my goodness, that is what the profession should be. Kirsten is what the profession should be. We all bring our ideas to the table. We test them in the real world. And if we find them successful, we bring them to everyone else. Now, where I draw the line personally is my definition of elitist is that I have a way of doing it. I become elitist when I tell you that you have to do it the way that I do it, which, of course, I won't do. I present my way of doing things because I think it works. If you would like to take on some of those ideas, you are welcome to. And that's how I think of elitism. There's a lot of room for digging around in what it exactly means to be a barrier. So I think you're going to enjoy this conversation, so stick around. A good portion of the behind-the-scenes support comes from the Patreon page for the Choralosophy podcast. Doing the show is a lot of work. It costs a lot of money. Advertising, getting the word out, making sure that there is always content available for you is not cheap and it's not free. And there are some folks out there in this audience who recognize that. And they see that there is value in their lives from listening to this show. And there is no better way to interact with one person helping another person who helps them. Like, my goodness, that's the golden rule. So on Patreon, you have the opportunity to do that. If this show is valuable for you, you can jump on over there for as little as $3 a month. There are even higher tiers where you can become a producer. You can check in with me for consultancy if you would like to. There's swag to pick up. There's a private podcast feed, all kinds of cool stuff over there. The producers from the Patreon page, that's patreon.com/choralosophy, are Vasquez Academy of Music, John Warner, Ulrika Igrain Munoz Alarcon, Chandler Smith, David Kowalczyk, Kyle Peterson, Michael Herron, Ryan Main, and Steve and Kathy Kakajik. Thanks a lot, you guys. Okay, everyone, I am here with Kirsten Oberoi, and we are going to have a really awesome conversation about the concept of auditions in choir, what it means to have a choir that is inclusive and people-centered, which is something that, of course, all of us want to accomplish in our environments. And what I love about this conversation that we're about to have is, like so many people that I meet in choir world, I meet through the internet, which is of course, the way we do it now, rather than at, at conventions. And so I had a chance to come across a blog written by Kirsten, and I had some questions about it, some disagreements with it. And the great thing about conversations on a podcast is that we can just talk about stuff. And so welcome to the show, Kirsten. We're going to talk about stuff.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Let's just first start with kind of the basic introductions, the short bio, so that my listeners will have an idea of who you are and where you come from for a frame of reference.
Sure. So my name is Kirsten Oberoi. I have always grown up in choirs. So actually, both of my parents were choral conductors. And I've always grown up singing. I was singing by the second I came out, and which kind of led me to about middle school when I said I will do anything in life except become a public school music educator, because that's the one thing I'm not going to do.
Right.
I will not do what my parents did. So I especially defied my father and decided I was going to dive into musical theater, because that was the antithesis. And in doing that, I did show after show after show after show after show, all the way from middle school through high school. And I was really into musical theater. But then in high school, I joined my choir at school, and I really enjoyed it. I liked the friends there. It wasn't a big flashy program. I grew up in Quincy, Massachusetts. It wasn't big and flashy. There were maybe 40 to 50 kids in the program, which is pretty standard for this area. 40 to 50 kids in the program. And we had a little after school ensemble for those of us who wanted to do a little bit more. But it was enjoyable. And I had a lot of friends through it, and we really had a great time. And then I got into All-State. And I was like, wow, like there's a lot more to this than I ever thought there was, which was really neat for me and a really cool experience. And I was like, but I still don't want to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to college and I'm going to major in music, and I am going to music direct musicals on national tours. And I'm going to travel around, and that's what I'm going to do. And so I decided that I was going to go to college on the opposite side of the country. So I went to college in San Diego, California, at a smaller Christian school, Point Loma Nazarene University, where I joined the chorus, and I was really excited about everything and just fell in love with the choir community there. I had an amazing instructor, Dr. Keith Peterson. I got to shout him out. He's the person that taught me everything I know. And he led so well and taught us how to be leaders and how to teach. It wasn't just here's choir, but here's how to teach choir, which was really, really powerful for me. And then I graduated and I started doing all of the things. I didn't have a public school job. I actually graduated with a music composition degree. I'm a music theory nerd. I love music theory a lot. I think it's awesome and really fun to teach, because everyone thinks it's hard, but it's actually not that hard if you teach it well. And I think that's really a fun thing to do. So I was a music composition major, but I had done so much choir. So I got my first job starting a brand new choir program at an inner city school in San Diego, after school high school program. And I was not actually a teacher at the school. So I was hired as like a club advisor from 4 parents who wanted me to do it. And that was a really life-shaping experience for me, because I had nothing to go off of. I had no classes during the day where I could recruit students. I had nothing, no community there that actually wanted it. I had 4 kids that were like, we like singing and wish we had choir at school. And then some parents that said, we'll pay you a stipend. And when you're 22, when they say, we'll pay you to do chorus, you say yes. We'll pay you a stipend to show up twice a week after school and make a choir happen.
Right.
And nothing has ever been so scary and wonderful at the same time. And I started that program, and 2 years later, we had about 60 students in the program that were showing up after school, and they ended up putting it during the day. And just when they ended up putting it during the day, I moved back to the Boston area where I grew up with my husband, who got his doctorate in choral conducting at BU at the time. That was when I kind of got my first job at a children's chorus. I had worked briefly with the San Diego Children's Chorus. I was their intermediate choir director there. And then I got my first job as the artistic director of a children's chorus. And I was preparing children's choruses for the Boston Symphony Orchestra, for Boston Lyric Opera, for all the big wigs in Boston. And it was awesome. And the kids were amazing. And I really was at odds with the philosophy of the organization for a lot of different reasons. And there were a lot of things there that, I was probably about 25 at the time. And it was a really exploratory time for me. I was like, why doesn't this work? Why do I hate doing this, even though nothing in my mind says I should hate it? Logically, it looks like I should love it, but I don't. And long story short, I left that job, which was my best paying job, doing all of the bigwig stuff, and I worked at the mall. And that was really a interesting experience for me. Nothing against working at the mall. I work at a restaurant now. I think it's great. It helps you connect with people on a different level and gets you out of the choir world for a little bit, which I personally think is good for anyone who teaches choir.
It's very important.
But about 4 months after that, I started my own children's chorus, which is when the South Shore Children's Chorus was birthed. And I thought, if I have a strong enough philosophy that I can't work for a different philosophy and feel good about it, then I need to start my own thing with my own philosophy and get it going. And then I did that, and I worked, I got a school job the next school year, and I worked at a middle school, grades 5 through 8, and I taught chorus and keyboard and music enrichment and the whole 9 yards. I had a great program. I walked into a program that had a great administration, amazing teachers. At one point, I had almost 250 students in my middle school choral program, and it was awesome and super fun. And then this past year, I actually left that position to focus more on my children's chorus full time.
That's an amazing story, and especially there towards the end, you kind of getting to the meat of why we're here tonight, which is the philosophy of leading a program. And in your situation with what I will call it your bigwig choir, and not feeling like your philosophy matched with that philosophy. And so first I'll start out by saying, I think that you did exactly what a person should do, which is if you don't like the way something is, you do a different thing, and you start something else and make it align with your values. And so that's wonderful. So I think where we'll start is where I met you virtually, which is through your blog. And so one of the first thing I will say is that I am no stranger to putting catchy, provocative titles on things to get people to click on them. So I understand the game. There's no shame there. But of course, what drew me in was no auditions ever. And so, of course, I immediately started thinking things like, okay, so this person doesn't want Voces 8 to exist or Seraphic Fire to exist. She doesn't want collegiate chamber choirs to exist that are mostly made up of, right? So when we phrase something in an absolute, then people who read it will immediately pull to the extreme, right? Which is that, well, if ever's in the title, then what does that really exclude? And so that was essentially my first reaction, which was why I had a beef with it at first, which is that If we're talking about, that's one of the things actually I talk about a lot on this show, which is to be careful of the attempts to include by excluding things. And so, because that's something that happens a lot, and I don't think people mean to do it. And so then I dug into your article, and of course, like anytime you read past the catchy headline, you read through the article or through the blog, and I was like, okay, well, I agree with that. I agree with that. Oh, I don't agree with that, but oh, here's another thing I agree with. And you start to actually dig through it, and you discover that first of all, the headline is not the whole article. And, and so this is the point. This is why I think that podcasts are so important. So I'm going to start actually by pulling out a couple things that I agreed with.
Can I actually jump in, Chris,
oh, yeah, please,
if you don't mind?
Yeah.
The title thing I actually think is really interesting. I didn't expect the blog to take off in the choral sphere. So the reason that the title was what it was, actually, it wasn't intended to be a clickbait title. It was intended to go out to our parents and to our the families of South Shore Children's Chorus to tell us why South Shore Children's Chorus has had no auditions ever. And here's why.
I get that now. Yeah, yep. that makes total sense now. Yeah. Just a few quick announcements. Don't forget that it is not too late to get your kids signed up for Sight Reading Factory for the year. You and all of your students need a membership. And they've just added Google Classroom compatibility. So that's a big announcement to just this last week. You can now sign in with Google and use Google Classroom with Sight Reading Factory. That's huge. It's just such a great tool. I've just finished our pre-tests for all of our kids. And so that we've set their beginning of the year level so that we could set goals for their individual sight reading growth before the semester. And it's such a worthwhile process. So make sure you use Choralosophy at checkout to get your discount. And then, of course, you're going to need some resident singers masks. You're going to need choir folders. So head over to mymusicfolders.com and get all your choir gear and enter Choralosophy at checkout there as well. Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. Because actually that there's a parallel for me in my life, putting my opinion on the internet, which is its own dangerous, thing. But I've had, probably my biggest topic on this show that has blown up in both good and bad ways over the last few years is the way I teach sight reading. It's a very unique system. Not a whole lot of people do it quite like I do it. And a lot of people are wanting to learn about how I do it so they can do it with their kids. But one of the things that I say in a very absolute way is that kids don't need notes played for them ever. All of our rehearsals are a cappella from day one. They don't get notes played for them. Now, when I said ever, of course, immediately people start shooting in all the scenarios where their contexts are completely different than my contexts. But when I said it off the cuff, it was the assumption of my context. Right. So in my context, and I was talking about things like school environments where you see the kids for hours and hours a week. You have a curriculum, you can build in certain skills over time. But if you're in a children's choir and you see them once a week or twice a week, or if you're a church choir and you see them once a week for an hour, then obviously people start reminding me of all these different situations where the absolute that I said doesn't make sense in every single situation. And so immediately I kind of, when people started, comment threading on your blog, I immediately had sympathy because I was like, I understand why something said like that in your context makes total sense. But then, of course, I started thinking about that statement in my context. So thoughts about that first before we dig into this article.
Well, sure. I mean, I actually received far more positive feedback than I did negative feedback on the article in comment threads and whatnot. I had a lot of fellow children's chorus people, actually, and I kind of want to start a Facebook group for children's choirs who don't audition. But a lot of people who globbed onto the philosophy, mostly the comment threads that negated the philosophy. Either it was clear they didn't read the article, which to me, I let that roll off my back.
Yep.
That's not, the title of the article is not my thought. It's the meat of the article, like you said. And actually pretty much all people from either high school or collegiate choirs were the ones that really felt at odds. The 4 or 5 comments that I did get, it was from either the secondary education or the higher education that were at odds with that. But I did get a lot of mostly positive response.
Right. Yeah. And I think for people who dig in to try to discover what the context of what you said is that's the natural extension, I guess, of that. So here's what I want to do. I want to look at a couple things that when I read your article that I really did agree with, and then I want to kind of dovetail into the context, because you mentioned that the collegiate high school type folks are the ones that were more likely to disagree with you. I actually think there's really good reason for that. That distinction would be made, and we'll get into that. So I completely agree with you that what you said in your article, which is that many people believe that singing is just something you're born with or you're not, and that's a battle that I fight with 9th through 12th graders every single day.
We all fight it.
Yep, and I completely agree with you, and I share the philosophy that that there is a growth mindset that is really important with singers, that no matter where you start, you can get better and you can get something out of the process, which is why I have whole episodes on this show about my also pretty unique grading philosophy, which is that we grade on growth. I don't care where a student starts, they can get an A if they demonstrate that they're better by the end of the semester. And of course, I have an advantage because I'm a music teacher and I don't have some kind of state mandated curriculum where they have to meet a certain benchmark for their grade level, which is of course arbitrary in the first place. I get to decide that we're going to grade on growth, and so I share that philosophy. Especially trying to convince parents of that too. Where it's hard to convince a parent sometimes that your child is new to this; they've never sung before. So maybe they're not doing, XYZ that their neighbor down the street is doing, but they're still doing really well because they're getting better. And sometimes that's hard for parents because a lot of parents put their kids in choir because they want to see them up on stage, like singing pretty, and so they can clap for them. Like it's a whole performative kind of a thing. So there's a lot in here that I agree with. But then kind of shifting into the reason why high school directors might disagree with you about no auditions in their contexts is because that as kids get older, because I actually think I could probably get behind that concept at the children's choir level, because there is no frame of reference for them to have developed skills or not, because they truly are beginners. But at the high school level, one of the things that I've been very proud of in our program is that we have a place for every kid who wants to sing, but very just in it, I see it as no different at all than Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Calculus. There's a starting place, and then there are skills to build. And when you've built those skills, you move on to the next level of skill. And I think that's important to develop the musician. And so that's why I wouldn't ever get rid of auditions at my school. Okay, now your turn. That's my thought.
Okay. So I think the first distinction I need to make is my children's chorus has a high school choir, and that is what I teach. So I teach the 7th through 12th graders. So I think that's an important thing to throw in here, because my programs, I've started several programs from ground zero, having nothing, no money, just market, internet, make them show up, go from there. And none of these programs have been auditioned, but all of them have been very high quality instruction and very high quality performance. And so I think that's just like the first distinction that we have to make, is that I also am a secondary educator. While I do run a K-12 program, I educate secondary level, and when I taught public school, I taught high school. I also taught a high school show choir in San Diego. I taught in a school in San Diego for a year, and then middle school, which is not high school, but it is considered secondary in some circles. And I think, yes, auditions, as I say in my article, not all auditions should be abolished. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is I do believe that in every program, at whatever stage you're at, high school, college, that there should be a choir that does not require an audition, and also doesn't mean that that choir is the sucky choir. I don't think those two match. And I think that that's the toughest thing to kind of, for people to wrap their head around. I think the people who do it really well have the non-auditioned, as it's called, y'all come choir. And then out of that choir is a more select ensemble. And if that's where you want to go with it, to me, that works. It's inclusive because there is no audition to get in. You can come and you can be at whatever level you're at. And I think that there is so much good in being at whatever level you're at and being accepted into this whatever level choir.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree in a sense. The way I would say it in my environment is we don't have sucky choirs. So they're all the kids are going to be placed in a choir that is appropriate for their level. And there isn't a sucky one. What we work and what we define and work really hard to define for kids within our environment is, how do we define success? And one of the first things that we talk about and we learn about, and it's hard for kids to accept at first because we live in an Instagram society, but one of the first things we do is that we say we're not going to define success based on us comparing us to other choirs. Like that's not where our success is going to come from. And they get that, and that's a really important part of our culture in our building, is that we have our classes are structured in beginning, intermediate, and advanced. And there are skills that, and again, my environment is kind of unique. And so that's why this has kind of piqued my interest, because the context of the environments are so different that this would be the challenge. So for example, I mentioned we don't play notes on the piano. So that is a skill that has to be taught to kids, and it takes years. So it takes years to go from day one to the point where a kid can just pick up a piece of sheet music, hear a tonic, and sight read everything, just with no cues. And with my advanced class, we do that on the first day of school, because they've already had that background, right? So for me to have an environment where anybody could just join, that would be antithetical to my philosophy, which is that I don't want followers. So a beginner in my environment would be following what the other singers are doing, but I don't allow that in my environment, because I want to start them where they're all leaders in ninth grade. No one is like the best one. They're all just learning this stuff so that they can get to the advanced ensemble and still all be leaders. So and this is kind of why I come down on this topic in the way that I do, is I actually believe, and I think I said this to you on one of the posts on Facebook, where I believe that there's room in the choir universe for all kinds of philosophies, like tons of philosophies. There can be a philosophy like mine, and there can be a philosophy like yours. And there also can be a philosophy where the quality of the musical output isn't even that important. Like, we just want to gather humans and make noises, and that's okay too. There could be the church choir philosophy, where it's just about making joyful noise unto the Lord, and if it's not in tune, then that's okay. But it's joyful, and God hears you, and there's room, and that's what I love about choir. There's just so many.
Yes, and I think what you just said kind of gets at the real crux, the difference in our philosophies.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think, when I listened to your podcast that sort of alluded to my blog,
Mm-hmm.
You had said, I get in my car every day and I think to myself, how am I going to make my choir better?
Mm-hmm.
And I get in my car every day and I think, how am I going to make those people become better people through the medium of choral music?
Yeah.
And I think that's really the difference of philosophy here, is that when you say they'll be followers, you mean musically.
Yes.
And that's not what I'm looking at. I look for leaders and followers, maybe not necessarily musically. Sometimes I have musical leaders, correct? Yes. Sometimes I have not musical leaders. Sometimes I have social leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Your first advanced choir rehearsal starts with them singing without the piano, where my first rehearsal starts with me trying to create chaos. Because if I can create social chaos, if I can create yelling and fun and enjoyment, all of a sudden I don't have a problem with students feeling outside of the group, right? I immediately go for that, how much fun can we have together, relying on those social leaders. And I think about the choir I have right now, and I can tell you that my musical leaders are not my social leaders. And my social leaders are not my musical leaders. But
Right.
having both of those types of leaders together, and those can be very different, right? Some of my musical leaders, in my mind, they are the advanced level, right? They are the ones that can sight read anything. If they don't need a piano, I can give them a tonic and they can sing anything, because these are students that I used to have in my school and they studied with me since 5th grade. And I, like you, I teach sight singing pretty rigorously.
Uh-huh.
And I would start them at 5th grade. So now they're in 10th grade now, and they can pretty much sight sing any alto line, and it's not an issue.
Mm-hmm.
But socially, I have kids that they barely know which line they're supposed to be looking at, but they're the ones laughing and bringing joy and excitement into the rehearsal, which helps the entire culture of the room come together.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's all wonderful. And I think what's interesting about that is that happens in my class too. But with the philosophy of the music literacy kind of being at the center of how we start, so that they have an understanding of the music that they're doing. And that, of course, when you mentioned the idea of making people better through the music, and I think about, I want to make the choir better. That's a great distinction. And the way I think of that, though, in my head, is that I think about the power of music itself. And I know that this, actually, I've seen people argue about this concept too on Facebook, which is interesting. But I actually believe that music has the power to make people better. In other words, people's hearts and souls and minds are opened to things that they aren't otherwise open to, because the music happened. And oftentimes even because of the way that the music happened, that goosebumps on the back of our neck kind of a feeling when things really, really sound good and gel and lock in together. There is a profound sense of togetherness that happens there. And so when I focus on the idea of building the whole person in my choir rehearsal, I come at it with the music first, because the music is how I get them to trust me. And the music is how I get them to trust each other. And then once I've sold them on the music, they are now putty in my hands to let me teach them about what it means to grow up, and what it means to be a part of a group, and what it means to be accountable to each other, and all of the types of things, the human things that we want to teach in a choir rehearsal. So I definitely don't not do those things. What I do is I think about the music's power to grease the wheels for me to be able to do that, which is an interesting. It's the same thing basically, but it's just two different ways of phrasing it.
It is and it isn't. I agree and disagree with you here. I've sung at the professional. I'm a professional level singer. I don't do much of it anymore, just because I'm so busy with teaching. But I have sung some really powerful pieces. I have performed some really powerful pieces with people who had negative attitudes and were not connected, and it did nothing for me.
Oh yeah. Me too.
And I think I've conducted performances of my students that were less than perfect, that were not these high level, professional level pieces like I was singing. But you look up and you see those kids just giving it. And ultimately, for me, that's a more moving performance. And I think for them, it's a more moving performance.
Mm-hmm.
So I really, and I think you're right. You go at it in a musical way, but I really do believe, in my whole podcast, Choral Connectivity is about the fact that I actually reject the fact that the music should be first. I reject the fact that music is more important, because I truly believe that the communal aspect of music is something that, specifically vocal music, I'll go so far as to say that, because I do believe that there is something different between us who sing and instrumentalists. I am an instrumentalist. I played trumpet growing up. I've done it. I play piano. I think it's all important. That's not my specialty. And I didn't choose to go an instrumental route because I believe that there is something very different and very connected to the human spirit about learning to use your voice and learning to use your voice.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with all that. I think that the clarification, though, that I would want to make to that is that I didn't actually say that the music is the most important. What I said was that the music is the medium that I use to get the kids to open themselves to the other things. Part of the reason that I think of it that way too is that we are, and this is maybe a part of your blog. This could end up being something we agree on or disagree on. I guess it kind of depends on what you meant by this. But down at the bottom, you use that phrase, which a lot of people use nowadays, which is music for all. And I kind of agree with that. What I would say is that music is for all, but choral music isn't. And choral music is not for all. Choral music is for people who choose it. And so there are tons of other things that people could choose. In fact, there are some people that, I don't know if you guys have this in Massachusetts where you are, but we have these like chain stores that are called School of Rock, like named after the movie.
Yeah, we have those.
Where kids can be in a rock band, and and a lot of times those kids are not in choir at my school anyway. Some of them are, but they're not in choir because that's an outlet that matches their personality, their interests, and the types of ways that they want to make music. And then maybe they don't sign up for choir. And the way I think of that is, I wish they would sign up for choir, but I don't lose sleep over it because I don't see the choral music art form as like the superior art form that all people should have to be in, or should be in. And to me, that School of Rock kid is doing music too. And so music for all, yes, I agree with that. I just think there are band kids and they should be band kids, and there are orchestra kids and they should be orchestra kids, and School of Rock kids and dancers and all those things. And that's fine. And not everybody's going to be in choir. So what did you mean when you said that in the blog? Tell me about that.
Well, music for all is a philosophy amongst a lot of public school educators, especially at the elementary level. And it's not that music should be forced upon all. That is by no means what that means. It means more like music should be accessible to all.
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
An accessibility issue, not a forced upon issue. No, not everyone's going to choose choir. I'm not going to make them choose choir. Although I do have to say, when you don't have a choir of 280 students, you might lose sleep over not getting that School of Rock kid in your chorus.
Yes. I'm glad you brought that up.
And I think that's an important distinction to make, because I think there are unique situations where I wouldn't want anyone walking away feeling bad, like they're wishing a student who sings outside of their chorus would sing in their chorus, because, for a lot of people, every student counts. So yes, we lose sleep over those students. We lose sleep over students who leave our program who have been there for a long time because they are overwhelmed with APs. We have, I don't know if you have that problem where you are, but I think it's countrywide, but I can only speak for what I really know, which is here. But, with more and more kids taking APs, they get stressed out and they don't have time for things like this. And that, I think, is where music for all comes in, is that there is an accessible way for anyone who wants to access music, whether that be learning about it, whether that be performing it, whether that be enjoying it and engaging as a passive listener, that there is a way for them to participate.
Yeah. Okay. Then I'm on board with that concept. And I think especially too, I'll make the distinction at the elementary school level where I would support some type of policy. And at least most elementary schools that I know of, many state laws require that every kid gets exposed to music. Now, the issue, of course, and I've heard you actually, your podcast, I should tell my listeners, is Choral Connectivity, and it's very well done, by the way. I haven't listened to all of it, but I listened to 3 or 4, and it's really well done. And one of the things that I remember hearing on there was the idea that at elementary school levels, there are pockets here and there of where kids are, getting music sometimes 30 minutes a week. Or
less
whatever,
than that,
or less than that.
Most of the elementary teachers I know teach on like a 6 to 7 day cycle, and they see the students for maybe 30 or 40 minutes in a 6 to 7 day cycle.
Yeah. Now, see, that's ridiculous. And if you're on the crusade, if using terms like music for all, because like stuff like that, then I'm fully supportive. Like that's in my school district, we complain in my school district because our elementary school kids don't get enough, and it's every other day for like 40 minutes, and we're trying to get more,
That is lucky. That is lucky. Yeah. Walk away with a big badge of happiness on that one, because I know many, many, many elementary general music teachers who do not have that privilege.
Yeah, actually, I think I might have misspoken. I think it's every third day, because that is because my son's in 4th grade. He gets music, art, PE, music, art, PE, music, art, PE during that time. So it is most weeks twice, but still a better situation than a lot. And then of course, on top of that, they can do choir after school, and they can do, band and orchestra after school and stuff like that too. So yeah, I fully support that, because at the elementary school level, that's when kids are being exposed to these ideas for the first time, and the idea of ensemble music, which, it's kind of like I was saying before, ensemble music is its own kind of special thing. I've even met high school age kids who have been taking voice lessons for quite a while. And I've like, maybe they go to a private school nearby me here, and they'll tell me they don't sing in choir because they want to actually become good singers. I'm like, all right, you need to go to a better school with a better choir. But so the idea that they just want to work on music by themselves, which I disagree with, but I have to respect at the same time. Like, some people just want to work on music by themselves, and music for all includes that to me.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there are benefits to doing both. I mean, I think anyone who teaches is going to agree with that. I mean, if you don't agree that it's beneficial, if you want to become a musician and that's what you want to do both, I think that's really, really important. But yeah, there are going to be things that work for our students and things that don't. But ultimately, what Music for All means is that accessibility is there. Yeah. And when we talk about accessibility, we're talking about, finance accessibility. That luckily in chorus, we don't have too much of that. Especially, I mean, maybe an outfit. That's the only thing I can really think of. But for a lot of us, our voice is free, which is nice. Mm-hmm. Our instrumental friends don't have that luxury. They have a lot more of accessibility issues with renting instruments financially. So I give them big props for that, because that's something that we don't have to deal with, that we're lucky that we don't have to deal with. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I want to circle back to something you said earlier, because sure. it was also really important and good, which is that you made the distinction earlier between a program like I am with 280 kids versus like a community organization whose function is to reach out and pull kids in and recruit kids and that kind of thing. And I will say, post-COVID, I am feeling a little bit more like I need to recruit because it's taken a huge hit on enrollment for us.
Welcome.
Yeah,
Join
right.
us.
Yes, exactly. But although this year we bounced back quite a bit after the online year because we're fully in person now, and um, but I think that's an important distinction too, because it kind of ties into what I was saying earlier about the choral music community being such what I think should be such a big tent to include the different types of philosophies that are out there because of pragmatism. So, for example, in your environment, I don't want to put words in your mouth. You might be stressing on a day-to-day basis, for example, of getting your enrollment up. Whereas I worry about that a little bit, but my bigger stress on a day-to-day basis is getting kids into a class that is appropriate for what they're currently able to do based on my curriculum. And so it has more to do with communication with guidance counselors of which class period they're going to be in, and those types of things. And so I don't often get in a situation where because they got assigned to the wrong class, they are then going to quit choir. Like that just doesn't really happen in my environment because they kind of grow up understanding that. Of that, just how choir works. At least I'm in high school, and they get that. And what I want to ask you about is another thing that you put in your blog here that I probably disagree with, but also again, there probably would be contexts that I agree with it. And that is you wrote quite a bit about the idea of asking kids to sing by themselves as a barrier in some way. If, like, in other words, I don't have an audition, I have a voice placement. And if you're asking kids to audition, if you're asking kids to sing by themselves, then it is an audition. And so talk to me first about how you conceptualize that for people who haven't read this article.
Sure. And I do think we're going to disagree here, which is fun.
Yeah.
I personally do not believe that there should be a gate between someone coming into chorus and having to sing alone before having to sing with the chorus. So what my article basically says is that if they're singing alone, in their mind, it becomes an audition. We can say whatever we want to say as the choral expert and say, you're going to make it no matter what. We're just listening for X, Y, Z, and we can make it sound as nice as humanly possible.
Mm-hmm.
But what society has taught us from American Idol, blah, 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 all of those awful things that we hate. Well, I shouldn't say that. All those awful things I hate. But other people might enjoy.
I hate them too.
Okay, cool. We agree there. But what that has taught them is auditions are scary. And us saying it nicely, unless that's going to do very little, especially for someone who's doing it for the first time. Because they have way more experience with the other thing. That what an audition means is you go on stage and there are 3 people and they're sitting there and they hit a buzzer if they like you, and otherwise you get big red X's over you, and you either, get a golden buzzer and confetti falls from the sky, or you get kicked off the show and you have to go cry, and Ryan Seacrest
that's unfortunate, because that's exactly what my choir auditions are. We have a red X and we have buzzers and confetti.
I knew we were going to disagree, Chris.
But that's I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and so I think that's what that generally any singer who hasn't auditioned before, who has audition anxiety, this is all adding to it. Mm-hmm. And so basically my stance here is, if we're asking singers to audition for us, especially singers who have not sung in a choir before, that what we're doing is talent checking. What we're doing is saying, if you have no experience with this before, then I want to check how talented you are, how naturally good you are at this before I teach you. And I think for me, what I do is I teach all of my students, and then I don't usually individually hear them sing. I'll usually offer suggestions in rehearsal. So I did this just on Monday. We had a Monday rehearsal instead of Sunday because of the long weekend. And we're doing a concert round that I found on Graphite Publishing, which I know your supports your podcast, but it's a great little round. And we were talking about the musicality of it. And I said, who wants to try this by themselves? And
was it Build the Sky?
It was not.
Oh, okay. That's a fun one too. Your kids would love that one. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll jot it down. No, it was Back to the Heart by Timothy Takash.
Okay. Yep.
And I love it. It's really, really great. I'm doing actually 2 of his rounds. I'm doing one with my treble chorus as well. But so in that environment, we had a really low attendance because it was a long weekend. So we had about 18 kids there. And even so, 8 or 9 of them raised their hand and sang it totally a cappella, totally alone.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of the kids didn't. And that was okay. And that's okay. You can sing alone. You cannot sing alone. You can sing for me. If any kid ever asks to sing for me individually, I will absolutely hear them. But what I'm not going to make them do is do it before they're ready. Because if they do it before they're ready, then what I'm doing is creating a negative experience for them. And I have had several students. I mean, we're talking 10, 20, 30 students in the past, possibly more, that would never, ever, ever want to sing alone, grow to that point, and then ask me to sing alone or audition for a solo and just absolutely nail it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No. So, I hear a lot of those things. I definitely disagree in the sense that one of the things that I think about anxiety. Are you familiar with cognitive behavioral therapy, sometimes just called CBT?
I am not.
So cognitive behavioral therapy is kind of the baseline main school of thought within therapy for really anything. So any type of behavioral issue, whether it be anxiety or depression or whatever. And rule 101 or rule 1 for CBT is that you figure out some way to confront your anxiety. And in other words, you don't push it away. And so one of the things that I think about philosophically as a teacher is that it is not my job to shelter kids from anxiety. It's my job to show them that they are more powerful than the anxiety. Now, every kid can approach that at their own speed. In other words, there are some kids in some situations where throwing too much at them all at once obviously would be catastrophic, and that's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about the kind of the idea of, okay, there's no other kids around, you're by yourself. I just want to hear what your voice sounds like. And for some kids that's really scary. But the great thing about a screening or a first attempt to hear the voice is that I get a chance to meet the kid one-on-one, especially if I'm thinking about they're new to the program or they're new to the school. Okay, I get to meet them one-on-one. I get to hear their voice, and I get to show them that even though they might have been scared about the audition, quote unquote, that's in their head, they might have been worried about that red X going off or whatever, that I get to show them the confetti afterwards. Because I already know I've got a place for them. And so I let them go through that anxiety, and then I show them, look what you did. Look what you did. You were so scared and you got through that. And that was you have such a beautiful voice. And I've got a spot for you in choir. And what I've experienced is that is a really, really important moment of connection that I get to make with the kid before I throw them into a class of 40 or 45 or 50 or 60 kids. Where they're going to start to sing in this environment where they feel very, very not seen because it's just so darn big, right? And so I need to have that opportunity to connect with those kids. And for us, the audition's a great time to do that for the first time. And then the other thing that we do in our program, which maybe you would disagree with, but every single one of our students sight sings by themselves for their final exam. So in order for them to start that process, we actually just finished with it today at school. Every kid sings by themselves as part of a pretest, just to see, and we grade on growth. So I don't care if you're a level 1 on Sight Reading Factory, or you're level 3, or you're just a kid who needs to figure out how to sing a scale. That's fine too. We're going to figure out where you start. And in order for me to do that, I need to hear them by themselves. And then we set a goal for them individually. It's kind of like an individual education plan for literacy. And they can, if they do the work that we assign, then at the end of the semester, they get an A and everybody's happy. And then more importantly, they feel super powerful because they improved. And so the philosophy there is, it's based on some of that same desire to be connected at the human level with the kids. It's just a different way of doing it.
Yes. I also think, though, that there can be a lot of anxiety in a student when they come in and the teacher wants to meet with them individually.
Mm-hmm.
I think you probably do a great job at relieving that anxiety. But I think, yes, do we all, not just kids with anxiety, do we all have to confront our anxiety at some point? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I don't want necessarily to be the one to cheerlead them through it. I want it to be their peers. I want it to be a communal thing that happens rather than just me being their support. I want them to show up that first day and feel seen in a large group. And that's the culture I work towards, is feeling seen in that large group. And, my biggest class when I taught middle school was my fifth grade chorus. One year had 88. My fifth grade chorus was my big one. So I never had less than 65. It was somewhere between 65 and 88. And I never had the opportunity to see those kids individually. It just wasn't built into the school day. There was just no way. I didn't have a secondary teacher on to be able to help me meet with kids individually. It was just not going to happen the way that the schedule was built. So I had to find a way to make them feel seen individually, which meant doing things like figuring out, like, what is their pet's name? How can I check in with them? And granted, this is a lower level, so you wouldn't believe how much it means to a 10-year-old if you can remember their hamster's name, but it does a lot. Yep. You have a fourth grader, so you probably know. But really what then it comes down to is creating that community. And I think of a student I had this summer, and 2 summers ago in my summer program, which is just a week. It's this crazy week-long summer program that we do. I started it in San Diego with the professional choir I was singing with, and then kind of plopped the program here when I moved here. And this student 2 years ago at my summer program sat alone, had a book with her, didn't really jump into the community. And after that week, felt so engaged in the community that 2 years later, she auditioned and got a solo. That same girl had an anxiety breakdown during chorus that summer, and I had to take her for a walk when everyone went to sight singing class. And so I think that there's a lot that can be, I remember she asked me before the solo, she said, do I have to sing it to the audience? They were all around the auditorium. She said, do I have to sing it to the audience, or can I sing it to the other soloist? Because he gives me confidence. And to me, that's where I want to build it. I want to build it that, yes, my peers give me confidence. When I look at my fellow singer in chorus, that's what gives me confidence. Because to me, I'm doing my best job when I'm as far out of the picture as possible.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I kind of think of that as a both and, rather than like a one or the other. Because of course you are exactly right that we want to foster environments in our choirs where the students or the singers or adults or whoever it is are a support system for each other, because ultimately that's the only way that any kind of real progress, however someone chooses to define progress, however any progress will occur, is when the director isn't the only one pulling.
Absolutely.
That's huge. That's Absolutely. Huge. And so I completely agree with you on that. So we've been chatting for almost an hour, so we'll kind of wrap this up with some final thoughts. One of the things that I wanted to share with you too before we're done is that it is one of my favorite bits of listener feedback, the types of listener feedback that I get. I'm further down this podcasting journey than you are a little bit, and so you'll probably experience some of this as you go. Is that when someone writes to me with something along the lines of, "I listened to that episode you did on blah blah blah. I didn't agree with all of it, but it was really interesting, and so I just kept listening. And thanks for telling me what you think." And for me, that's like, some people might want to hear about just everything like, oh, I agreed with you. Yes, you were right on this, and you were so right on that. But actually, that's my favorite kind of feedback, because ultimately that's the kind of conversation we're missing in our world, the social media centered conversations that we have, where I love when a listener says that I agreed with some things, I didn't agree with some things, but it was still interesting, thanks for doing it. Like, to me, like, that's what conversation should be. And so I commend you and I applaud you for what you're doing. And when you're just putting stuff out there and starting a conversation, we desperately need that. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you. And thank you for having the conversation with me and having me on.
Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share with the audience about this topic, or really just anything else? And of course, I want you to tell us a little bit more about your podcast too on the way out.
Oh, sure. So my podcast kind of explores a lot of different things. I have a lot of philosophies. People have told me for a long time you should start a podcast, and I thought maybe the year I didn't go back to public school could be the year I do it, because I actually have time now. And I think one of the best things about my podcast that I'm really enjoying is talking to different people from all different aspects of chorus. I have about 7 episodes. I have an eighth one coming shortly, but I speak to an elementary general music teacher, a collegiate teacher, University of Toronto, Dr. Jamie Hillman, middle school teacher, Dale Duncan, high school. Did I talk to a high school teacher? I can't even remember at this point. And the next episode or the one after, I'm actually going to be talking to a couple of my students. And so really trying to gather as many different viewpoints as I can about this kind of just what choir does for people and what singing does for people, and how when you really just put the person above everything else, that in the end, I believe is the right way to do it, is a really strong way to help people, and to use this art for good. And I think, whether or not you audition your chorus, whether you're collegiate or elementary or any of those things, a community singer, a church choir singer, the fact is, at this point, we all need to come together, especially after the past year and a half. And this is a bit of a tangent, but we all need to come together and bring this art back.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And
I'm excited to see that happen. And because I think another big reason I started this podcast is we went without making choral music in person. And we had to, for a while, count on what I'm talking about, the human connection, the people part of it. Mm-hmm. And I think, let's add the music back, but let's keep the people connection part of it, because as we delve into this world of technology, choir is one of the few things left that we're not behind a phone during rehearsal. We're using our bodies, and we need that in person to make that happen. And as I said, I'm just really thrilled to have choir back. And I think a lot of us are.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really awesome. One of the things that I think it might have been one of your first episodes, you vented a little bit with your guest about just the frustration of how COVID has taken away something that for people that we kind of acted like it was a fluff or like a luxury, but in a lot of ways, for a lot of kids, and especially, it's not a luxury. And I had mentioned earlier that COVID hit our enrollment quite a bit last year, less so this year. For frame of reference, for that human connection that we've been talking about, it was the kids who hadn't ever met me in real life that quit. It wasn't my older kids. My older kids stayed. They stayed through the Zoom rehearsals that were awful, and they complained and they sent me emails that was so dumb. Why do we have to do this? Well, because we have to be back at some point. And I'm like, oh, I know, we got to get back. It was the older kids that stayed. We had that connection. It was the younger kids who their first meeting of me was on a Zoom meeting. Correct. The first time. They'd never met me before. And of course, okay, guys, we're going to sing into a microphone. And they're like, no, I won't. And I will go to the guidance counselor and I will quit now. Like that's essentially what it was. So I completely hear you. And since we're kind of running out of time here, and I also, since we had disagreed on so many things, which was so much fun, I do want to highlight one more blog that you wrote just briefly for my audience.
Sure.
That I agreed with almost every single word, just to make you feel better, which is the one you wrote about.
I felt fine.
I'm teasing you.
I know.
Okay.
I know.
The 2 choral terms we need to stop using blog. I completely agreed with that. Don't tell your kids to sing with a mature sound unless, of course, you've done really careful work to pedagogically to explain what that means, and telling people to blend. So we are on the same. I tell my kids, blend is not a verb.
Nope.
You don't blend on purpose. It happens.
Correct.
Right.
I love that. I might steal that from you. Blend is not a verb. I really like that because
Yeah.
I think it's tossed around a lot, especially, with when you have a clinician come in or whatever, and we use these terms, and my kids don't even know what blend means because I don't use it.
Mm-hmm.
But
The way I explain it to kids is if you sing the same note on the same vowel with an approximately similar resonance and approximately similar volume level, blend is a thing that will just happen.
If you create good sound, healthy, good sound.
And if everyone's doing that, then it will blend. But if I start telling kids, hey, blend, well, they're just going to pull themselves out of the equation. So yeah, completely agree with you. You're doing great work, and I appreciate you coming on to talk with us.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you, Chris, and good luck with the rest of your year.
Awesome. Thanks. Thank you so much for listening and sticking around for that conversation. I hope you found a little bit of back and forth to be not too uncomfortable. I think we definitely handled ourselves a lot better than pundits on cable news. So thank you for listening to that episode. That was fun. On the way out, don't forget, there are some really important things that you can do to help the Choralosophy podcast continue and strive and thrive. And that is to subscribe to the Patreon first. Patreon.com/Choralosophy. That is a big deal. $3 a month or more if you are able to help underwrite the cost of this show, and some pretty fun user perks over there as well. And then, of course, liking, sharing, commenting, that's huge. Putting episodes that you found interesting and valuable on your social media feed and proudly proclaiming to the world that you are no longer a closet Choralosophy listener, but a loud and proud Choralosophy listener. Thanks a lot, everybody. We'll see you next time.